Welcome back to the Path to Peace Therapy podcast. I'm Stephanie Buckley, parenting strategist and family systems coach. I'm also a mother to a thriving neurodivergent 23-year-old son with ADHD, and I've been married for over 3 decades, so this work is not just professional for me, it's deeply personal. On this podcast, we talk about what is really happening beneath the behaviors you're seeing at home, and more importantly, what actually creates lasting change. Parents come to me exhausted, frustrated, and defeated. They are tired of mornings that feel like chaos, tired of transitions that turn into battles, and tired of feeling like they're missing something everyone else seems to have figured out. Today, we're going to talk honestly about the tension between wanting a quick fix and needing a systemic solution, and why understanding your child's biology and your family system together, not separately, is the turning point. Parents who are raising neurodivergent children often say they are looking for clarity, and in many ways that is true. But beneath that request is something even more human and more urgent. They are actually hoping for a quick fix. They want something that will stop the meltdowns, smooth the mornings, reduce the arguing, and make daily life feel manageable again. This desire does not come from laziness or denial. It comes from nervous system overload. When a household has been living in chronic dysregulation, the brains inside that home are not thinking in long-term systems, they are scanning for immediate relief. That is what stressed nervous systems do. The problem is that neurodivergent challenges do not resolve through isolated interventions. Anxiety, ADHD, emotional dysregulation, and executive functioning difficulties are not contained solely within the child. They live inside the family system. They are shaped by routines, expectations, sensory load, relational dynamics, parental regulation, and environmental structure. You can introduce charts, incentives, supplements, scripts, and consequences, but if the family system itself remains reactive, inconsistent, or biologically misaligned, those tools will not hold. What parents are actually searching for when they want a quick fix is relief. The relief that comes when the system stops fighting the child's nervous system and starts supporting it. Real change happens when the family system becomes predictable, regulated, and biologically informed. That is when behaviors shift faster than any surface-level strategy ever could. When parents move from reacting to designing systems, when they stop blaming character and start debugging friction points, the home begins to settle. This is biological advocacy at the family level. It is not permissive and it is not slow. It is precise. And paradoxically, it is the fastest path to the relief parents have been chasing all along. The problem is that neurodivergent challenges do not resolve through isolated interventions. Anxiety, ADHD, emotional dysregulation, and executive functioning difficulties are not contained solely within the child. They live inside the family system. They are shaped by routines, expectations, sensory load, relational dynamics, parental regulation, and environmental structure. You can introduce charts, incentives, supplements, scripts, and consequences. But if the family system itself remains reactive, inconsistent, or biologically misaligned, those tools will not hold. What parents are actually searching for when they want a quick fix is relief, the relief that comes when the system stops fighting the child's nervous system and starts supporting it. Real change happens when the family system becomes predictable, regulated, and biologically informed. That is when behaviors shift faster than any surface-level strategy ever could. When parents move from reacting to designing systems, when they stop blaming character and start debugging friction points, the home begins to settle. This is biological advocacy at the family level. It is not permissive and it is not slow. It is precise. And paradoxically, it is the fastest path to the relief parents have been chasing all along. When a child with ADHD struggles to start a task, stay focused, or transition away from something stimulating like a screen, the world often labels the problem incorrectly. People call it laziness, lack of willpower, immaturity, or defiance. But in the world of neurobiology, what you are actually seeing is a chemical supply and demand problem, particularly related to dopamine. Dopamine is not just the pleasure chemical the internet loves to oversimplify. Dopamine is the brain's anticipation, initiation, and reward prediction chemical. It is heavily involved in executive functioning, meaning the brain's capacity to start a task, sequence steps, sustain effort, shift attention, inhibit impulses, and follow through. A neurotypical brain tends to maintain dopamine at a more stable baseline that supports initiation of boring but necessary tasks. For a child with ADHD, dopamine levels often start low, and dopamine transporters can clear dopamine out of the synapse too quickly, meaning the signal does not stay available long enough to turn the engine over. The child begins the day at a neurochemical disadvantage. What a neurotypical brain experiences as annoying or not my favorite can feel physically and neurologically taxing for an ADHD brain. The cost of effort is experienced as higher, while the perceived reward is experienced as lower. That is not a motivation problem in the moral sense. That is an executive function problem in the biological sense. Their brain is essentially in a power saver mode, conserving energy for tasks that promise a worthwhile return. One of the most important pieces parents need to understand early, because it quietly undermines even the best intentions, is why video gaming and social media are disproportionately toxic for a neurodivergent child's nervous system. This is not because screens are inherently evil, and it is not because neurodivergent children lack discipline or maturity. It is because ADHD and other forms of neurodivergence involve differences in dopamine regulation, impulse control, emotional reactivity, and executive functioning, and modern digital platforms are specifically engineered to exploit those exact vulnerabilities. Video games and social media deliver rapid, unpredictable, high-intensity dopamine bursts with very little effort, which is neurologically irresistible to a brain that already operates with a lower dopamine baseline. Over time, this trains the brain to expect constant stimulation, immediate reward, and novelty on demand, while simultaneously weakening tolerance for boredom, frustration, and delayed gratification. For a neurodivergent child, this doesn't just make everyday tasks feel harder. It fundamentally rewires the reward system so that normal life begins to feel flat, irritating, and emotionally dysregulating by comparison. Transitions become explosive, not because the child is oppositional, but because the brain is experiencing a sharp dopamine withdrawal. Emotional regulation deteriorates because cortisol rises during intense gaming or scrolling, hijacking serotonin production and narrowing access to the prefrontal cortex. From a family systems perspective, this creates a ripple effect. Parents become the enforcers, siblings experience volatility, routines collapse, and the household begins organizing itself around screen access rather than shared regulation. What looks like a child who can't stop is actually a nervous system that has been trained into dependency on artificial stimulation. This is why screen management is not a behavioral issue. It is a biological and relational one. When screens dominate the reward system, parents are unknowingly competing with a machine designed to win. Protecting a neurodivergent child from excessive gaming and social media exposure is not about punishment or control. It is about preserving the brain's capacity for motivation, connection, emotional flexibility, and real-world learning within the family system. This is why screens become such a trap for the ADHD brain. Video games and social media are engineered to deliver constant, high-intensity dopamine hits with very low effort. They are the neurological equivalent of a slot machine that pays out just often enough to keep the brain chasing the next reward. When a child begins the day with screens before food or movement, they are flooding an empty neurochemical tank with artificial fuel. The brain learns quickly that a massive reward is available instantly with no effort. Then parents attempt to transition the child into boring but necessary tasks like brushing teeth, packing a backpack, getting dressed, tolerating a sibling, or listening to instructions. The child's brain responds not with rational cooperation, but with internal revolt. From the brain's perspective, this is not stubbornness, it's economics. Why would the brain pay a high cost of effort for a low reward when high reward is available immediately for free? And when the screen is shut off, dopamine does not gently return to baseline. It often drops below the already low baseline, creating what parents experience as a sudden mood crash, irritability, aggression, or explosive dysregulation. This is why transitions can look like rage. You are not taking away a toy. You are removing the child's primary source of regulation in that moment. Their nervous system experiences it as a steep drop in the chemical that allows them to feel capable and steady. This is where parents often get tricked into believing their child is choosing not to cooperate because the child can clearly focus when they want to. They will say he can focus for 4 hours on Legos, but he can't focus for 5 minutes on brushing his teeth. What looks like selective effort is actually interest-based motivation, a hallmark of the ADHD nervous system. The ADHD brain is not unmotivated, it is interest-driven. When a task is novel, urgent, challenging, or deeply meaningful, dopamine rises and the child can lock in, sometimes with intense hyperfocus. Hyperfocus is not evidence that ADHD is fake. It is evidence that dopamine can be accessed when the task naturally provides it. When a task lacks those qualities, especially routines like mornings, the brain cannot find the internal chemical spark to initiate. The child may know what to do and still not be able to do it. That gap between knowing and doing is executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction is not stupidity, not stubbornness, not lack of care. It is a breakdown in the brain's self-management systems, particularly in the interplay between the prefrontal cortex and reward circuitry. If you want a child with ADHD to show cooperation, you have to stop treating cooperation as a moral choice and start treating it as a state-dependent skill. State-dependent means the behavior you can access depends on the brain state you are in. This is why supporting the chemistry matters. When you create a protein-first morning and movement before screens, you are not being controlling. You are building a biological ramp. You are giving your child's brain the raw materials it needs to say yes. When we support biology first, we stop fighting the child's brain and start coaching it. This is biological advocacy in action because you are designing conditions where executive functioning becomes possible, rather than demanding executive functioning from a brain that is chemically under-resourced. To understand why this matters so much, it helps parents to know the core brain chemicals that govern behavior. Dopamine is the engine of motivation, and as we've said, it drives initiation, sustained attention, and follow-through. When dopamine clears too quickly, effort feels heavier, and boring tasks feel impossible. The screen warning is critical here because screens provide an artificial spike that creates a crash, and that crash is what parents experience as transition meltdowns. A high-protein breakfast matters because it provides tyrosine, an amino acid precursor to dopamine, meaning it supplies the raw material the brain uses to synthesize dopamine. Hydration matters too, because even mild dehydration can impair concentration, increase irritability, and worsen cognitive flexibility. Parents are often asking a child to produce executive function before they have given the brain what executive function runs on. Serotonin is the anchor of stability. Serotonin supports emotional grounding, patience, and the ability to tolerate frustration or a change in plans without immediately flooding. Most parents associate serotonin with mood, but in reality, the vast majority of serotonin is produced in the gut. Approximately 95% of the body's serotonin is made in the gastrointestinal tract by specialized enterochromaffin cells, synthesized from the amino acid tryptophan. That gut serotonin acts as a signaling molecule that communicates with the brain through the vagus nerve, which is the primary highway of the gut-brain axis. The vagus nerve is not a metaphor. It is a literal nerve pathway carrying information about safety, inflammation, digestion, and arousal between the body and the brain. When the gut is inflamed from poor diet, high stress, sleep deprivation, or food sensitivities, serotonin production can be disrupted and the child becomes emotionally brittle. This is why a child who is hangry or living on processed foods can appear more rigid, more anxious, and more reactive. It is not simply attitude, it is biological depletion. It is also important to clarify that gut-derived serotonin does not cross the blood-brain barrier, meaning the serotonin made in the gut does not directly enter the brain. However, the precursor tryptophan can cross. That is why protein intake matters so much. You are supplying building blocks. You are not fixing your child. You are feeding the chemistry that allows the brain to stay steady. Endorphins are the buffer for stress. Endorphins are the body's natural painkillers and stress relievers, and they help a child tolerate minor discomforts, delays, and frustrations without collapsing into overwhelm. Some kids seek intensity to generate endorphins. They may provoke arguments, roughhouse, or stir conflict, not because they are bad, but because their nervous system is trying to self-regulate through intensity. That does not mean you allow unsafe behavior. It means you recognize what the nervous system is hunting for, and you give it a safer pathway. Morning movement, laughter, rhythmic play, or even a brief dance party can create an endorphin buffer that makes the school day more tolerable and reduces the likelihood of emotional explosions. Oxytocin is the safety net of connection. Oxytocin is produced in the hypothalamus and released by the pituitary gland, and it is often called the bonding chemical because it supports trust, warmth, relational safety, and openness to guidance. Dopamine is about pursuing reward. Oxytocin is about feeling safe with another person. Oxytocin lowers cortisol and dampens amygdala reactivity. The amygdala is the brain's threat detector, and when it is firing, the brain prioritizes survival over learning. In children with ADHD and anxiety, transitions often trigger threat signals because transitions involve uncertainty, separation, and loss of control. When oxytocin is flowing, the brain is more receptive. This is why connection before correction is not soft parenting. It is neurobiological strategy. You cannot bond a child into liking homework. Oxytocin does not motivate tasks, but oxytocin makes the environment safe enough for effort, which is the foundation of cooperation. This leads directly to the chemistry first morning order, because order determines outcome. For a child with ADHD, the morning is not simply about getting ready. It is about resetting the nervous system, filling neurochemical reserves, and building a regulation ramp. The first step is wake and light, because the circadian rhythm is controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's internal clock. Bright natural light in the first part of the day triggers a shift in melatonin and supports serotonin and cortisol regulation. Cortisol is not the villain. It is the brain's natural alertness hormone, and the cortisol awakening response helps the brain become awake and ready. When you open the curtains immediately or step outside for a few minutes, you are giving the brain a clean wake-up signal. If it is dark, a quality light therapy lamp can mimic that effect. This is not wellness fluff. This is circadian biology, After light comes protein and hydration because you cannot demand executive function from a brain that is chemically underfueled. Protein provides tyrosine for dopamine synthesis and tryptophan for serotonin synthesis, and hydration supports cognitive performance. Then comes movement, because movement releases endorphins and increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF is often described as miracle grow for the brain because it supports neuronal growth, connectivity, and neuroplasticity, meaning the brain's capacity to learn and adapt. Movement also helps regulate arousal and primes the prefrontal cortex for focus. It does not need to be a workout. It can be 2 minutes of jumping, a vestibular reset, a quick game of floor is lava, or a short walk. The goal is to shift brain state from sluggish or dysregulated into calm alertness. After movement comes connection, because emotional safety determines cooperation. Eye contact that is warm, not corrective, a steady tone of voice, a quick side-by-side interaction, or a deep pressure hug can release oxytocin and lower threat. Many parents mistakenly begin the morning with commands, corrections, and urgency. But urgency activates the amygdala, and an activated amygdala suppresses the prefrontal cortex. That is why children become less logical and more reactive the more you push. Connection is not a reward for good behavior. Connection is the gateway to regulation. Then, and only then, screens become a controlled reward rather than a neurological hijack. Screens last, not first. They become a dopamine finish line, a when-then tool. When the smoothie is finished and shoes are on, then 10 minutes. Screens are not evil. They are powerful. You either use them strategically or they use your morning. When morning video games come first, the ADHD brain essentially spends its entire daily budget of focus and emotional regulation before 8 in the morning. The dopamine flood is immediate. The brain protects itself by down-regulating receptors, which means the brain becomes less sensitive to natural dopamine. Then the game ends and the child crashes. The child is now in a deeper dopamine deficit than before they started. At that point, basic tasks feel physically impossible because the brain is starving for stimulation. Additionally, intense gaming can elevate cortisol because the brain experiences in-game threat and reward as real. High cortisol can steal tryptophan away from serotonin production. So now the child has low dopamine and low serotonin, meaning they have low initiation and low stability. Parents interpret the result as defiance. Biologically, the child is dysregulated and chemically depleted. This is why your reframe matters. This is not about punishing your child. This is about preventing neurological sabotage of the entire day. When you protect the morning, you protect your child's capacity to function at school, tolerate frustration, transition, and learn. You are not withholding joy. You are sequencing joy so that it does not destroy the architecture of the day. You are teaching the brain that dopamine can be earned through effort, and that the nervous system can tolerate transitions without collapse. One of the fastest ways to shift brain state in the moment is through vagal stimulation. The vagus nerve is the primary parasympathetic pathway, which means it governs rest and digest responses, downshifts sympathetic arousal, and reopens the prefrontal cortex for reasoning. A 60-second vagus nerve reset can be a powerful transition bridge. Cold water on the face triggers the dive reflex, lowering heart rate and signaling the brainstem to downshift. Humming creates vibration that stimulates the vagus nerve as it passes near the vocal cords. Deep pressure through a bear hug or shoulder squeeze provides proprioceptive input, which is organizing and grounding for the nervous system. When a child performs these actions, vagal signaling can increase acetylcholine, which acts like a brake on fight or flight and allows the prefrontal cortex to come back online. This is not just calming, it is state change. It is neurological access being restored. Breathwork is another direct vagal lever because the vagus nerve interfaces with the diaphragm. Deep diaphragmatic breathing physically stimulates vagal tone, lowering arousal and improving emotional regulation. Techniques like 4-7-8 breathing, box breathing, or balloon breathing, they are about training the nervous system. The long exhale is the key because exhalation activates parasympathetic dominance. When parents learn to see breathing as a nervous system tool rather than a behavioral intervention, they stop demanding calm and start producing calm. Nutrition matters in a way that parents often underestimate, particularly with tryptophan. Tryptophan is an essential amino acid, meaning the body cannot produce it. It must be consumed. Once consumed, it can convert into 5-HTP and then into serotonin, which later can convert into melatonin at night. This is why serotonin and sleep are connected. If a child has insufficient serotonin, sleep can become harder. If sleep is disrupted, serotonin replenishment becomes harder. Then the next day starts with increased cortisol and lowered stability. The pathway is cyclical. It is not a parenting failure. It is biology. And there is a nuance parents need to understand. Tryptophan competes with other amino acids to cross the blood-brain barrier. Pairing protein with a healthy complex carbohydrate can help because a small insulin release can reduce competing amino acids and allow tryptophan more access to transport. This is why oatmeal, banana, or other fiber-rich carbs paired with protein can support mood stability. When parents ask me about supplements, this is where I provide the info and ensure they understand that supplements are cofactors, not cures. Omega-3s support membrane health and receptor functioning, essentially helping dopamine and serotonin signaling transmit more efficiently. Magnesium supports the nervous system braking, especially in forms like glycinate or bisglycinate, which can be calming and sleep supportive. Probiotics support the gut-brain axis, but strain sensitivity matters, and a low and slow, one-at-a-time approach is essential for neurodivergent kids who often have sensory or digestive reactivity. Parents also need to hear the truth clearly. No supplement can override chronic sleep deprivation, chaotic routines, blood sugar instability, or a morning that begins with screen-based dopamine flooding. Supplements help the system only when the system is designed well. This brings us back to family systems, because a child does not exist in isolation. Inconsistent authority, over-explaining, negotiating, rescuing, and parents correcting each other in the moment are not just parenting style issues. They are nervous system issues. When parents are inconsistent, the child's brain stays vigilant because it cannot predict the environment. Predictability is safety. Consistency is kindness. If a pilot changed the flight plan in turbulence based on passenger anxiety, the passengers would panic. A child in neurobiological turbulence does not need flexibility from the pilots. They need calm leadership and predictable route setting. When a child escalates and parents negotiate, the child learns that escalation is a functional strategy. That is not manipulation. That is learning. And for neurodivergent kids, learning happens fast when it is tied to dopamine and control. One of the most powerful reframes for parents is that a dysregulated child often accidentally becomes the boss. When a child controls the pace, the rules, the timing, and the emotional atmosphere, it looks like the child is being difficult. But what is actually happening is role confusion. The child is holding the job of running the house, which is far too heavy for a 10-year-old nervous system. When parents hold boundaries, they are not being mean. They are firing the child from that job. They are giving the child permission to return to childhood. That is a family systems intervention because it reestablishes hierarchy, which is essential for emotional safety. Children do not relax when they are in charge. They panic. They just look like they are arguing. As systems become more robust, the parent's role shifts. You move from being a crisis manager who is constantly reacting to problems to a lead consultant who designs, observes, and refines systems. This is one of the most mature parenting transformations you can make. When a system fails, and it will, you do not blame your child's character. You debug the system. You ask where friction occurred, whether the step was too big, whether the cue was missing, whether the environment created an unnecessary barrier. This is advocacy. It is respecting neurobiology rather than fighting it. A simple example is expecting a child to fill their water bottle every morning, but storing the water bottles high in a cabinet that the child cannot reach easily. That is a barrier. If you keep the same demand but do not remove the barrier, you are creating a daily failure loop. And failure loops do not build responsibility, they build shame. When you remove the barrier, you build competence. Competence increases dopamine. Dopamine increases follow-through. Now you are not nagging, you are shaping the environment to produce success. This is why the phrase, "a place for everything and everything in its place," is not about being tidy. It is about reducing cognitive load. Cognitive load is the amount of mental effort required to manage information and decisions. Neurodivergent kids often burn through cognitive load faster because executive functioning requires more effort. When you reduce cognitive load by making systems obvious, accessible, and predictable, you preserve executive fuel for the tasks that matter. You are not spoiling your child. You are scaffolding their development until their brain can carry more independently. The deepest truth I want parents to take from this episode is that your child is not intentionally giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. But having a hard time does not mean you remove boundaries. It means you create a biologically supportive structure so boundaries become tolerable and skill building can occur. This is hard work. You are doing it because you love your child and you are working toward a more harmonious home. We are not looking for perfection. We are looking for healthier patterns, more calm repetitions, and fewer shame cycles. When a child's biology is supported, the parent's strategies finally land. When the parent's strategies land, the child's nervous system relaxes. And when the nervous system relaxes, behavior becomes teachable. That is the entire point of biological advocacy. It is not soft, it is intelligent. It is neuroscience applied to real life. Parents who are raising neurodivergent children are rarely asking for a quick fix. They are asking for clarity. They want to understand why their child can look brilliant in one setting and completely shut down in another, why mornings feel like combat, why transitions can trigger explosive reactions, and why the word no can land like a threat instead of a limit. In my work as a parenting strategist and family systems coach, I see the same pattern again and again. Parents are not confused because they lack effort. They are confused because they have been handed the wrong lens. When you are using a moral lens, you interpret behavior as attitude, defiance, laziness, or disrespect. When you are using a neurobiological lens, you start to recognize that many of the behaviors parents are reacting to are not primarily character issues at all. They are regulation issues. They are chemistry issues. They are executive function issues. This is where the concept of biological advocacy becomes a turning point. Biological advocacy is the practice of shifting from fixing a child to supporting a child. It is the decision to treat behavior as information about brain state rather than evidence of moral failure. It is also the decision to stop fighting your child's brain architecture and instead build systems that work with it. It is not permissive parenting. It is precision parenting. It is advocacy rooted in neurodevelopmental reality. This episode is for educational purposes and to provide support. It is not a substitute for professional mental health evaluation, diagnosis, or treatment. The more we learn to recognize the signs behind the behaviors, the more compassion and clarity we can bring not just to our kids, but to ourselves and to the entire family system. If this episode helped you reframe what's happening in your home, I encourage you to share it with another parent, caregiver, or educator who might be living in the same cycle and wondering why nothing seems to stick. You can subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes and explore additional tools and resources at thepath2peacetherapy.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at thepath2peacetherapy. If you're in California, I offer virtual sessions, and if you're not in the Hermosa Beach or South Bay area, support is still available online. You can book directly through my website, and you can always shoot me an email at stephanieb@thepath2peacetherapy.com. As always, take a deep breath, give yourself some grace, and remember, peace is possible, and you don't have to do this alone.